Well, hello everyone. I'm OtterlyNoah. Nice to see you all. Thank you for coming to my panel today. Today we're going to be talking about retro gaming and mental health, games that dive into the mind, so this will be fun. For those who may not know me, I'm a YouTube partner. We just hit 32,000 subscribers, so thank you for that. Thank you. My favorite game of all time is Ghost Trick for the Nintendo DS. Glad to see some Ghost Trick fans out there. I love that game.
I still need to play it, but it looks really great.
Play it. It's amazing. Definitely worth your time. I have a French bulldog named Stella, who's right there. My favorite films include Ghost in the Shell, Ratatouille, Amadeus, Tron Legacy, obviously. There we go. Memento, Seven Samurai, and plenty more. So mental health is definitely a very relevant topic now, it feels like. It feels like it's something that people are beginning to open up more about lately. Like even just like 10 years ago, I feel like you wouldn't see people opening up as much about that, but now we get that, and that's cool, that's good. Especially like with more events coming up for that, like in June, for instance, that's actually Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, which is very cool. And the month before that has been designated Mental Health Awareness Month just in general in May. And it's something that doesn't always get discussed, at least I think like 10 years ago even, it wasn't discussed nearly as much as it is now. Like people weren't as willing to be open about it. But now we get more discussion on that and more like just straight up official events for that, which is great. And it's good to see people opening up more about that and being more willing to discuss these topics that don't always get discussed enough. Especially for like something like Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, like men statistically aren't as willing to be open about that. So it's cool there's a whole month like dedicated to letting people be open about that in general. So where do gaming and mental health collide, you might be wondering? Gaming has a very unusual history with mental health. Some think it can be a detriment to it, while others see it as something that can be a boon to mental health and improve it, offering like a distressor like when you need it. Who hasn't wanted to just vibe to Animal Crossing after a hard day at work? Be very relaxing and just take your mind off things. And like anything, it's good in moderation. Like as long as it's not like overtaking your life, obviously, and it's good for your mental health, that's good. That's always good. And since mental health has become a more relevant topic recently, a lot of games have been directly tapping into that, which I think is really cool. As just people in general have been more willing to open up about that, art in general has been more willing to tap into that. So we've seen a lot of games, even just 20 years ago, that have been very willing to dive into mental health in a very raw, very real way. And it's really cool. Like one of the earliest examples, and one of my favorites, is American McGee's Alice. Who's played that game? There we go. Very glad to see that. That is a great game because it has a really respectful and really raw but real portrayal of trauma for sure, and PTSD and bottling up feelings and memories, and it's represented in a very, very fantastical but also very real way still. It's a very unique game. It was made by American McGee, and it focuses on a version of Alice from Alice in Wonderland, the classic books. It takes place after Alice in Wonderland and Alice Through the Looking Glass specifically. And it takes place when she's, back in the real world, basically. She's with her parents one night. Her house burns down and she loses her parents. So she suffers a lot of trauma, obviously, because of that. She's admitted to a hospital. And you basically play the game within her mind. So she kind of retreats to a psychological version of Wonderland, basically. But it's very twisted, and it sort of reflects how her mental health is at the time through all that trauma. So you go in and literally fight her inner demons and fight a lot of different monsters throughout Wonderland, and also different characters from the books like the Mad Hatter's there, Tweedledee and Tweedledum are there, but they're all like really twisted and very reflective of how her mental state is in that very traumatic time. And it's very interesting. And the game basically ends with her finally kind of learning to accept that her parents' death wasn't her fault and not her responsibility, and also just taking the time to grieve and move forward. I think that's really cool. I think it's one of the best representations of that in just media in general. And one of the most interesting things with that, I think, is like the final boss in the game. So in the game, you fight the Red Queen, who is basically like, she's a character in the books too. But in the game, she's more a manifestation of Alice's like pent-up trauma and the memories and such. And it's very interesting the way they do this in the game, I feel like. So she says some stuff to Alice, actually, in the form of Alice, because she sort of takes the form of a lot of Alice's insecurities in this game. So I think what she says is very interesting.
I rule Wonderland alone. Your interference will not be tolerated. This realm is for grown-ups.
Raw, well-ordered, ruthless, careening on the jagged edge of reality. Self-pitying dreamers are not wanted here. They cannot survive here. You fear the truth. You live in shadows. Your pathetic attempts to reclaim your sanity have failed. Retreat to the sterile safety of your delusions, or risk inevitable annihilation. If you destroy me, you destroy yourself. Leave now, and some hollow part of you may survive. Stay, I will break you down. You will lose yourself forever!
I think they cool, yeah, very intense for sure, very wild. But obviously she wins. She overcomes that trauma and just accepts her parents' death. She moves on and she grieves and moves on to a better life and better mental health. And I think that's one of the most inspirational representations of that in media. American McGee's Alice does a really good job of that. Was that gonna move? Manually. There we go. The sequel. Who's played the sequel, out of curiosity? Alice Madness Returns. Okay, cool. A few people. I feel like not enough people played this game. This one is interesting to me because it builds upon a lot of the ideas from the first American McGee's Alice game, and it kind of builds upon it, I think, in a really respectful way as well. I do prefer the first game, but this one's also really good to me. So it builds further upon the psychological ideas from the first game, but instead of like just taking place in this sort of psychological version of Wonderland in Alice's mind, it swaps between you being in like modern day London, where Alice, is, and also in that twisted Wonderland. So it sort of reflects like her facing the atrocities of real life, modern day London in this case, and also being able to retreat back to that, when she feels like she needs to. Although, of course, in the game, because it's reflective of the trauma and the mental state she's currently in, it's still very twisted, just like it was in the last game. So, much like the last game, you're going in and fighting a lot of her inner demons in this psychological version of Wonderland, but you're also facing a lot of real-world danger and a lot of real-world trauma through like the modern-day version of London. I think this is definitely, I think, where the game almost becomes better than the first one in some ways, because you get that duality. You get both like the real-world trauma and also also real-world trauma, but like fictionalized version reflected through Wonderland. I think it's really interesting. Very good game. So as her like gathering pieces of her repressed memories of how her parents actually died in that house fire at this point years ago, and I won't spoil the game because I think you should play it, but she uncovers a lot of truth about her past, and it allows her to move on even further than she was able to before. She's able to, I think, even find even more solace than she did in the first game, and it's really good. It's really good stuff. Psychonauts, unfortunately though, great game, but actually not good mental health rep, surprisingly. You'd think so, but The first Psychonauts game actually was kind of a step back in terms of that. So, American McGee's Alice, the first one, came out in 2000, and that was a pretty good representation of that. Psychonauts was kind of a step backwards, actually, surprisingly. So, the game follows Raz, who's a psychically gifted kid who can enter people's mindscapes, which is basically sort of a combination of their, trauma, memories, all this sort of stuff, reflected through very surreal imagery and stuff. He's at a summer camp for psychically gifted kids in general, so there's other kids like him. He's the most psychically gifted out of them all. The problems arise, though, when they depict mental health very stereotypically. I like this game, but I have to admit it does not depict mental health the best, per se. They have a whole asylum sequence with a lot of very stereotypical and sometimes even just problematic depictions of PTSD, anxiety, and trauma that have been inflicted on the patients there. There's the milkman, who probably everyone remembers. There's the Napoleon guy whose name I forget. They're fun characters, but they're not very good, respectful representations of mental health. So that part, I think the game has aged pretty well in terms of gameplay and other stuff, and the comedy for sure, but other things like that aren't the best, obviously, by today's standards. Still a great game, but just not good mental health rep. Now, when we get to Psychonauts 2, on the other hand, I think that's a huge improvement. I think that was a much better representation of that. That game came out a lot later. Double Fine released that in 2021. Much better game for mental health rep, in my opinion. Big improvement. They actually worked with mental health professionals for this game, which they didn't do for the first one. So that's why a lot of that comes off as very stereotypical. But the second one, they actually took the time to work with real mental health professionals. So we got more accurate representations of things like trauma, anxiety, PTSD, things that were in the first game, but more, not as caricatured here, which is great. They ended up being a more respectful, introspective look at those conditions, which I think all media should strive for anyway when tackling that stuff. The game also moves away from asylums and having that as that kind of location, and depicting mental patients as dangerous and stuff. And it opts for a more healthy and more nuanced perspective of providing empathy for mental health and wanting to care for those people and not stigmatizing it, which I think is the better way to go in general for that. Night in the Woods, who's played that? Okay, cool. A few people as well. Night in the Woods is also very good and takes a very real, accurate look at depression and loneliness through the lens of different anthropomorphic animal characters. There's a lot in there. May is the main character. She's the little cat there. The game, it's definitely a very brutal game, I will say. It doesn't hold back, so definitely trigger warning if you do play that one. But it does create a very respectful and very realistic look at the mental battles that a lot of people fight every day, especially characters like the ones in this game. The game focuses on characters, returning home, dealing with stagnation, depression, anxiety, and changes in identity. It doesn't try to solve the issue, but it portrays them as lived reality. It's a very realistic game, just by having cartoon animals in it. Hellblade, who's played that one? Okay, there we go. Glad to see a few more people play that. Very good look at psychosis in particular. The game is built around Sidua, who's the main character. Her experience of psychosis, hearing voices, feeling isolated, haunted, seeing things that may or may not be real. The developers worked with neuroscientists and people who had a real experience with psychosis to create a respectful and realistic portrayal. It uses audio and visual design to make you feel the disoriented of psychosis. So you'll actually hear that in the game because it creates almost a living experience of that, weirdly. And it's very jarring, but very realistic of how they portray that. The story emphasizes acceptance and living with mental health, and rather than fixing it, just learning to live with it and accept that about yourself. But yeah, definitely a big trigger warning for this game too, I will say. It is good though. Lightning Round Turbo Edition. We're gonna go through some other mental health game here. Good mental health games here real fast. Life is Strange. Anyone played that one? Glad to see that. It's an episodic game. Actually takes place in Oregon, which is cool. Focusing on emotional storytelling, choices, and their consequences. And it does touch on a lot of mental health themes in general and trauma. Celeste. This is an interesting one because, there we go. Glad to see a lot of people play that. Very difficult platformer for sure, but it does have some good, it does tap into anxiety and perseverance with a lot of the things in that game in particular. It's good for that. Persona, obviously, a lot of people like that franchise. There we go. Uses the metaphor of creating personas to explore self-acceptance and confronting your shadow self, which it's a very philosophical game as well because of that, but it does tap into psychology a lot as well. It's very cool. Space for the Unbound. I feel like a lot of people don't know about this one, but it takes place in 1990s Indonesia, and it tackles a lot, like a whole cast of characters kind of learning to accept past trauma and move on from it, and that's actually what the whole game is about. So, very good look at that too. I recommend that one. And Spiritfarer. There we go. It's a cozy management game that helps, has you helping spirits move on. And it addresses themes of grief and loss. And just in general, it's cool to see so many games and pieces of media really tapping into this. Because a lot of, like I said, even just 10, 20 years ago, you wouldn't see as much media really diving into it as much as these games are now. But with more openness and acceptance and awareness for mental health being out there, it kind of helps these games become more prevalent, especially with indie developers who get to more or less do what they want. And it's really cool to see that passion and that realness in those projects. And that's it. Thank you for playing. Awesome. And I did want to do Q&A. Any questions at all? Any experiences y'all want to share? Any questions? Hello?
Hi. So I have two examples. One is a full game. One is an instance of a character from one of my favorite video games. I'll start with the game first. So I started streaming recently, and for my October game, I have been playing a game called Coffee Talk. Anybody here played Coffee Talk before? Yeah.
I've heard of it.
It's really good, but it's heavy.
Kind of figured, yeah.
But it deals with a lot of social issues, especially in the modern day. This was made in 2020, so that's a bit of a time. And in particular, one thing that I personally resonated really well with was two of the people that you meet is a girl and her father. And the girl, Rachel, is basically like an up-and-coming pop star, but she has, she's been having disagreements with her father because he's worried about her safety, and, they used to be a lot more in tune, but then, her mother passed away, and as somebody who has lost her own mother and, having that sort of trouble connecting with my dad, it hit really hard, and the dad just wants Rachel to be safe, and is just worried for her safety because he's been in the entertainment industry before, and he knows what kind of things happen, like the whole idea of just getting chewed up and spit out, And Coffee Talk is an amazing game. I recommend everybody play it. As for the character, it comes from a more famous game. Anybody heard of Xenoblade Chronicles 2?
Whoa!
Yeah! So I'm going to talk about one of the main characters, Mithra. And when I first met Mithra, she was kind of a brat. I didn't really like her, but then you start to learn more about her, and you learn the fact that she's dealing with a lot of self-hatred because she thinks that she's this monster, this weapon created only for destruction. And then you kind of realize that, so for those who have played Xenoblade 2, slight spoilers, Mithra is technically one of two halves, the other half being Pyra, who you first meet in the game. And you kind of realize, especially after playing the DLC story, that Pyra was basically created as a construct for Mithra as essentially to cope with a lot of grief and what happened to her back then.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Good to know. Any other questions? Back there, back there.
What game struck a chord for you the most that's kind of fallen into this mental health?
Honestly, Ghost Trick surprisingly is a very good one for that, my favorite game. A big reason why I like that one is sort of like the sense of identity. Like that, I won't spoil that game, but it's very much about that for sure. So if you play it, you'll know. But like kind of finding your own purpose in the world basically is a lot of it, like finding your own identity. It's a very good game, and it's by the creator of Ace Attorney as well. And yeah, a lot of the themes in that game really struck a chord with me for sure. Any other questions? White shirt.
Oh, yeah. Have you ever heard of the visual novel Echo?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, because you mentioned A Night in the Woods, and it reminded me of like this visual novel I played years ago called Echo that like touches on a lot of the same themes, and all the characters are like furry animals too.
Oh, really? Interesting. It's funny.
It's really fascinating, but it's also like very dark and heavy because it's a horror story.
I'll have to check that out. When did that come out?
Somewhere around like the mid 2010s. It was like a visual novel before like it became like super popular. So like the writing's kind of a little rough, but like it's very enjoyable. I do recommend trying it out.
Okay. I'll check that out. You.
So in your research for this topic and so forth along those lines too, have you read anything in regards to as developers develop games, are they looking into the ICD-10 codes in regards to how they would properly classify or maybe refer to them or the other like set standards for mental health and disability and stuff like that, and incorporating that into the future of gameplay or future of this gameplay story?
You know, that's a very good question. I haven't asked any developers about that, but that is something I should ask them. There are some upcoming like mental health related games that I'd be keeping an eye on for sure. There's one I saw recently. I think I saw they're trying to develop a sequel to Spiritfarer, so that's one I'm keeping an eye on. If anyone's played the game To the Moon, that's a game that, yeah, very, very sad game for sure, but also very good. And it has good autism representation in it as well. And I believe the people behind that game are making a new one. They haven't said much about the project yet, but I'm keeping an eye on that for sure. So, good question though, thank you. Yes?
You mentioned how indie devs seem to be more open to actually discussing mental health issues and everything like that. Would you say that like larger companies and AAA game industry is still kind of afraid to touch these topics because it's still seen as taboo, even though it's been more talked about than ever nowadays?
Honestly, yeah, I think that's definitely something. Like, it still is kind of taboo, you're right. I think more developers in general are more open to it now and more people are, but yeah, a lot of AAA industry, like, you know, developers won't really touch that. That is true. And I think a lot more indie developers, because they're more personal projects usually, will actually touch on stuff like that. So that is why I do tend to keep my eyes more on the indie scene. I mean, I'm also just not really as big on AAA gaming as much anymore, which is probably why I'm here at this convention. But I think indie developers do a better job of that, yeah, for sure. You.
Are there any examples from recent years where sort of it was like an attempt that ended up in misrepresentation, like a swing and a miss?
For the last few years or so?
Yeah, I'm just saying recently there's more attempts at it.
Yeah, there's definitely, I can think of some movies that have definitely swung and missed for sure with that. I think generally though, a lot of, like at least, because like I said, a lot of big developers aren't even really bothering to tackle that. So usually you get indie developers, which they usually have a better idea of how to represent that. So you kind of, honestly, kind of in the last few years at least, I don't think there's been that much bad rep for it. Like I said with Psychonauts, like the first one anyway, that wasn't great. But, you know, it's like 20 years ago now, so, you know. Yes?
As someone who works in the mental health field healing, working through a journey, and obviously gaming and creativity. I'm wondering where the industry stands currently as far as adopting skills training into gaming, and that's something that's on the horizon. I mean, it's like it's DBT skills or like other therapeutic skills being taught and normalized through gaming.
So I don't work in the video game industry, I'm just a content creator. I've talked to developers, however, and there are some that are trying to do that. I mean, like I said, they're like with bigger companies like say Sega or Capcom, because I work directly with Capcom. I know at least they're trying to implement that more. They are a AAA company, so there's only so far you can go with that. But I've been trying to push them at least to kind of put that more in there because that's important. Ultimately, though, it's in their hands. I can only do so much. I only have so much of an influence. I hope they do, though. That would be really good, honestly, and I'd like to see that. Yes?
So I have two games I want to bring up, neither of which I've actually played. But have you ever played Silent Hill 2?
I have.
Would you say that has a good representation of like handling mental health?
Weirdly, yeah. Actually, obviously, it's a very, very raw, very real game. Not for the faint of heart, but yeah, that actually does a pretty good job, I would say. Kind of like, American McGee's Alice. Like, that is an older game, but it does a good job because a lot of like those themes of trauma are very personal. A lot of that is because American McGee, when developing that game, he was kind of going through his own personal trauma regarding his parents because he had just had a divorce and stuff, or his mom had just divorced his dad and stuff. So a lot of those feelings were kind of put directly into his game, weirdly. So that there's also that very like personal experience. I think that is what makes it relatable for games like that, especially.
Can I bring up one more?
Yeah, go ahead.
Expedition 33. Have you played that?
I've heard a lot of people like it. I still haven't though. I do need to play that.
It goes into, in my opinion at least, it goes into a lot of this stuff towards the end, and I think it handles it in a really cool way.
Interesting.
There's a lot of stuff about grief and that kind of general topic.
Okay. Yes.
All right. I was going to go into deeper detail regarding Persona, but obviously you mentioned Persona, and I think instead of explaining, I think it's better to leave these things unspoiled. But
yeah, definitely.
But regarding just Persona and these other games that have been handling psychoanalysis, and especially Carl Jung's ideas as a content creator that has delved deeply into Jungian ideas, how do you see sort of like that sort of contrast between maybe the Psychonauts are definitely probably going into ideas too, but they're also maybe focusing, especially maybe the first one more on CBT ideas about that sort of contrast between the more fixed idea and the idea, well, Jung is trying to, how do you think it through yourself in Persona and these other things that have these Jungian concepts, I think, deal that, even if they help various degrees they actually represent mental health, or just these ideas of working through your own journey.
So you mean like psychology versus philosophy kind of, or like when you mean like when games that deal with psychology also kind of incorporate philosophy, right? Versus the more base level kind of textbook thing, like Psychonauts first one.
Jung considered himself a psychologist, but like the thing is that it's sort of seen as for many people archaic, but like Jungian therapists still exist, and they have to do things in a way that it's very much work for your dreams, work for your shadow selves, all that. And I think obviously it's been more popular in these more Japanese media who's obsessed with Jung because Jung was brought to East Asia by people like Hawaii. Like, how do you sort of just that message of when you brought up like don't fix it, don't be fixed.
Yeah, like just accept it, like accept that part of yourself. I think that's the better way to look at it, because like something like Psychonauts, at least the first one, again, like I keep trying to clarify that. I like that first game a lot. I think it's a really fun game, and it still holds up too. It has a lot of charm, great comedy, great voice acting, and I think like the second one is better in regards of tackling mental health because it has that more like accept it, that more empathetic kind of response to it rather than just like fix it or push back against it. And that's good. I think that's a healthier way to look at it too. Any other questions? Yes?
I unfortunately arrived late. Did you touch on The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask?
I should have talked about that one, because that's actually my favorite Zelda game. Dang it. But yeah, that's another really good definitely good representation of like depression for sure, and grief, because that's kind of all over that game. But yeah, that's my favorite Zelda game. And also really good representation of mental health. You're correct. Absolutely. Any other questions? Oh, yeah?
How are you doing?
I'm very good. Thank you for asking. How are you doing? I'm glad to hear. Absolutely. Oh, yes?
Well, why are mental health games your focus?
Well, last year I actually did one regarding autism in Retrogaming, so I just decided to follow that up, kind of, similar like neuro-related topic with just mental health and gaming. And like I said, I think that's definitely a topic that kind of is, represented more positively, at least in media lately in general, and gaming being one of them. So I figured it was a pretty worthwhile topic. Yes?
What do you think you'll do for next year?
I don't know. I'll have to figure that out for sure. That'll be interesting.
Asking you the big questions here.
Yeah, for real. Yeah?
You bring up the concept of like hiding negative emotions or traits in persona. That kind of leads me to wonder, with regards to certain aspects in the autism spectrum, and particularly like masking traits. That whole thing. Would you say there are other characters in recent games that you've seen kind of show their masking?
Well, I don't know about, not recent games, but if you play the visual novel Steins Gate, that's, I think, actually one of the best portrayals of that. Because the main character in that is like a mad scientist, Ohoin Kiyoma, his real name is Okube in the game. That one's interesting because he puts on like this mad scientist like persona as a mask, basically. It's not really him. And it's throughout the game and kind of uncovering more about who he really is that you see that mask drop, and also see him, let him like be more open about his true self to others, and also just be more open to people in general, because he's a very like guarded person in that game, I will say. And it's not until like later in the game, getting like talking to other people, like interacting with them, people that have a positive influence on him, that you really see that mask start to drop. And it's a very interesting representation because of that.
Good recommendation.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
What was the game called again?
Steins Gate. I very much recommend that one. Also my favorite anime, because it did have an anime adaptation as well.
I was about to ask about that.
Yeah, it's you can probably experience it either way. The visual novel is the best way to go, but if you want like probably the more accessible option, the anime is also very, very good. Very well done. Well, I think that'll probably do it for today then. Awesome.
Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and here are a few more videos for you to check out.